Police officers laughed at the old woman, but when they saw her son's photo, they turned pale. Charlotte Lewis was an old woman who was going back to her hometown after her son passed away. When she reached, the neighbor had put on loud music and it was becoming difficult for the old woman to sleep. She lodged many complaints, but nothing happened. Finally she went to the police station. When the police came to know the identity of her son, they immediately took action and apologized to her. Charlotte Lewis was troubled by her neighbor and she had complained umpteen times about the same. But every time the police went, the neighbors would outrightly refuse all the allegations. Therefore, the cop took the old woman into custody, thinking that she was purposely wasting their time. At the police station, Charlotte's purse fell down, and all the contents inside it fell down, including her son's picture. One of the policemen was stunned when he recognized her son and immediately apologized to the old woman. Charlotte packed everything she needed to take with her to her country house, including her pet cat. She had bought the house 5 years ago after her son Stephen passed away in a terrible car accident. The old woman shed many tears at the loss of her loved ones, before finding the strength to live on. Her husband had lost his life 20 years ago, and therefore her son always came first in her life. For almost her entire adult life, Charlotte had worked as an English teacher at school. However, as the woman became aged, she was diagnosed with certain chronic diseases. As a result, she had to quit her job, and gradually Ms. Lewis found solace in growing flowers at her country house. Charlotte hopped on the bus and sat at the window seat, enjoying the pleasant view that unfolded before her eyes. All along the journey, the lonely soul was wondering about her garden and the beautiful flowers. Ms. Lewis finally found herself at the gates of her house, and instead of being welcomed by a beautiful smell, she saw a pile of garbage on her lawn. There were empty beer bottles and cigarette butts, and though the house was deserted for a long time, she wasn't expecting this. Unable to stop crying, she looked around and saw a lot of expensive cars parked near the neighbor's house, which meant that they were holding some kind of gathering at their place. Charlotte knew that they were responsible for this mess, but before jumping to a conclusion, she had to confirm her suspicion first. She had heard that some young people had moved into the house a month ago. Before the old woman had time to let Duke, the cat, out of his carrier, she heard loud music and someone's drunken cries coming from the neighbor's house. The noise was so loud that a flash of pain instantly pierced Ms. Lewis's head, threatening to turn into a vicious migraine. At first, she tried to ignore the music and decide to clean the house and her lawn. Being busy with work, Ms. Lewis didn't even notice when the day came to an end, and the evening brought a pleasant coolness. In the meantime, the celebration next door was getting so wild that even the tightly closed windows and doors could no longer save her from the loud sounds of music. It was becoming too much, and if this kept continuing, then Charlotte would have a hard time having a good night's sleep. Therefore, she went and knocked at the neighbor's door. The old woman waited for 20 minutes before someone answered the door. Charlotte was greeted by a young woman of about 25 with traces of obvious alcohol intoxication on her face. She introduced herself and asked the young adult to lower the volume of her music. The woman smiled slightly in response, took a sip of wine from the glass, and answered, "Why should I do that? This is my house, and I have every right to do whatever I want. We have something to celebrate today, so why are you bothering me?" Charlotte knew that there was no point arguing with the woman, as she was completely drunk. The next morning, the same thing happened, and this time the old lady knew that the neighbor was just troubling her. This was ridiculous, and therefore she reached for the phone and decided to call the police. When they arrived, the young woman had turned off her music, but still, Ms. Lewis and the cop knocked at the door. The owner answered, flat out refused the allegations, and instead blamed it all on Charlotte, saying that she was an old senile lady. At this point, the policeman said to the old woman, "Ma'am, if this happens again, I'll have to take you to the station and issue a fine for a false call and for lying to the police." Turns out that the young lady was Wendy, the daughter of a wealthy businessman, who was well known among the city's elite. The next day, the shameless neighbor turned on the loud music again, and Charlotte called the police. Wendy turned off the music before the cop came and made the old woman look like a liar. The cop believed her and told Ms. Lewis to come down to the police station tomorrow at 10 a.m. The next day Charlotte Lewis was worried sick before she visited the police station, and even put on her best clothes. As soon as she walked into the police station, she immediately felt the mocking gaze of the police officers. Many of them whispered and pointed at the bewildered old woman, hinting that she had lost her mind and tried to slender her neighbor. The lonely lady was so anxious that she accidentally dropped the purse from her hand. All the contents were scattered on the floor, including a photo of her deceased son. Charlotte quickly tried to gather all the things, but at that very moment, the head of the investigation department appeared next to her and saw the photo. He inquired about the picture and realized that she was the mother of Stephen. Turns out that he and Stephen served together in the Marine Corps back in their youth, and were both stationed in Baghdad during the battle in Iraq. The head officer then promised Ms. Lewis to personally look into the situation and punish the ones who were troubling her. Not only the woman but also the police who didn't investigate properly were punished. Charlotte Lewis was sure that Stephen was now watching her from heaven and, just like 5 years ago, he was smiling sweetly at his beloved mother.